I'm Danielle Harris. I'm 22 years old, and I just graduated with a biochemistry degree, a degree I traded my entire youth for. But just a week ago, my parents still called me a useless leech, and yet here they were today, throwing me a lavish graduation party. Champagne flowing, a live orchestra, fresh flowers everywhere. You'd think this was a moment of reconciliation. But then I saw it. My father's hand, dropping a strange white powder into my glass. My heart stopped. They didn't just want to ruin my future, they wanted to end me, their own daughter, on my graduation day. Why? $12 million. That's the trust fund my grandmother left me. Money I'd only get when I turned 23 or graduated. If I died first, it all went back to them. And there's another horrifying secret about my family's pharmaceutical empire, one I'm about to expose. But what they didn't know is that I'd heard everything. I'd seen everything. And I had a plan. If this makes your blood boil the way it did mine, hit like, drop a comment to tell me what you think of their actions. And subscribe with the bell on so you don't miss the next part, where I'll tell you exactly how I turned their plan into the very evidence that would destroy them. Living in a perfect family while being treated like the stain on their reputation. I'm Danielle Harris, and this is how a family that looks like heaven from the outside can be the coldest place on earth. People call us the Harris Empire. My father, Joseph Harris, built Harris Pharmaceuticals from a small lab into a billion-dollar pharmaceutical giant, admired all over the country. People see him as the symbol of brilliance and grit. But what they don't know is that same ruthlessness he uses in business, he uses it on the people in his own home. My mother, Eleanor, came from old money, a family with generations in pharmaceuticals. She's obsessed with a flawless image, the kind of house that lands on the cover of architecture magazines, charity galas that make Chicago's elite swoon. But at home, she calculated every word, every look, and never missed a chance to belittle me, as if I were a stain she needed to scrub out of the family portrait. I have one sister, Sophia, 3 years older. To them, she's the golden child. Straight A's, winning awards, Harvard grad, the perfect heir to the company. I remember every time Sophia played tennis or piano in competitions, our parents were front row, eyes shining with pride. Me, even when I won first place at the state science fair, my dad didn't look up from his newspaper. He just muttered. That's the bare minimum for a Harris. It's like always standing outside, looking in at a warm family room. But the door's locked from the inside. I'd always wanted to study environmental science. By 16, I was fascinated by how pharmaceutical waste impacts ecosystems. But when I told my father, he laughed. A cold, dismissive laugh. Tree-hugging dreams won't put food on your table, Danielle. They had my future mapped out. Pharmacy school, join the company, run the research department. Just another perfect cog in the Harris machine. Every time I pushed back, they shut me down. The breaking point came in my senior year of high school when I secretly applied to Northwestern's environmental science program. My father's rage when he found out, I'll never forget it. If you step into that useless field, don't expect a cent from me, my mother cried, lecturing me about family duty and tradition. I had to choose, give up my dream or lose all financial support. In the end, after weeks of cold silence, they agreed. With conditions, I had to double major in biochemistry and spend every summer interning at the company. I took it. It was the only way to keep my path alive. But from then on, every family dinner was loaded with snide remarks. You'll come to your senses eventually. When you need real money, you'll come running back. The only person who ever truly stood by me was my grandmother, Lillian. She had been a brilliant chemist herself, but was forced to stay in her husband's shadow her entire life. She knew what it felt like to have your dreams strangled. Every time we met, she'd tell me, Danielle, never let anyone decide your life for you, not even family. Before she passed, she left me a gift, a $12 million trust fund managed independently. The terms were crystal clear. I'd receive it when I turned 23 or graduated, whichever came first. Enough money to walk away from their control for good. I thought my parents didn't know until 3 months before graduation. In a company meeting, a lawyer casually mentioned the trust. I saw my father freeze, his face drain of color before hardening. My mother's grip tightened on her handbag as her eyes darted away. I didn't know their exact thoughts, but I could feel the storm building. Because to them, that $12 million wasn't just money, it was power. If I got it, I could leave forever, maybe even expose what they were hiding. But if I died before then, it would all return to them. And if there's one thing I learned growing up a Harris, it's this. When the stakes are high enough, family is just a pretty word you use for the press. The happy day that turned into the day of fate. From that moment on, I could feel something shift inside the Harris household. There were no more lectures about joining the company the moment you graduate. No more long, suffocating text messages from my mother listing the right career paths I should follow. Instead, there was a strange, heavy silence. Around the same time, whispers started reaching me from a few old friends interning at Harris Pharmaceuticals. Rumors that the company was under a quiet investigation. Some said batches of experimental drugs had slipped past safety protocols. Others claimed waste from the West plant was being dumped directly into the river. And I knew if I went public with what I'd heard, the Harris empire could crumble overnight. One day, I came home to grab some files for my graduation project. Walking past the hallway toward the garden, I heard my mother's voice, sharp, urgent. "Joseph, are you sure this is necessary?" My father's voice came back, low but hard as steel. "You want to lose everything? The FDA's breathing down our necks. If she opens her mouth about the West facility, we're finished." But poisoning our own daughter? Have you thought about Sophia? Sophia will be fine. I'll just make her sick for a few days, like food poisoning. Just long enough for us to move things around and transfer the assets before that trust fund is released. If she doesn't make it, well, you know what happens. The money comes to us. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I froze, forcing myself not to breathe too loudly. My mother whispered, voice trembling, "God, Joseph, if anyone ever finds out." "No one will. I'll do it at the graduation party. A special glass of champagne, and it'll all look like an accident." I could feel the blood drain from my face. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was a plan. Graduation day arrived. Chicago's sky was blazing blue. I put on my cap and gown, forcing a smile as I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to bury the dread. At 9:30, the family car pulled up. My mother looked me over from head to toe. No congratulations, just a frown. "Couldn't you have done something about your hair?" "The photographer's taking family pictures." Sophia stood beside her, offering a small smile like she was trying to soften the tension. I caught her eyes and wondered, if she knew, would she even believe me? The ceremony went by in a blur of applause and long-winded speeches. When my name was called, my two best friends, Taylor and Zoe, cheered like maniacs. I glanced at my family's row. My parents' faces were blank. After the ceremony, we were driven to the Peninsula, Chicago. The rooftop was transformed into a gala. Live music, a champagne fountain, fresh flowers, and a guest list dripping with wealth. Dr. Lewis, one of my father's old business partners, approached with a glass of water. "Congratulations, Danielle. Impressive work. But half the people here seem to be your father's business associates." I looked around. He was right. So many faces I didn't recognize. In one corner, my father was deep in conversation with two men in tailored suits. Across the room, my mother chatted with Gerald Thorne, the family lawyer. A knot of unease tightened in my chest. When the band shifted to a softer tune, my father tapped his spoon against a glass. In 15 minutes, we'll raise a toast to Danielle, the pride of the Harris family. I watched him signal to a server pointing to a gold-labeled champagne bottle. That one, for the family. And just like that, the words from the other day replayed in my mind. A special glass of champagne. I excused myself, heading toward the restrooms. The main one had a long line, so I slipped down the service hallway. And there it was, the scene I dreaded most. My parents stood at the far end, speaking quietly, their voices dripping with menace. Mom, are you sure it's the right dose? Dad, enough to put her in the hospital. Maybe more. Mom, Joseph? Dad, if she dies before getting the money, the trust comes to us. Don't lose your nerve. I stepped back, heart pounding like a drum. They weren't hiding it anymore. When my parents' plot turned back to destroy their perfect daughter, I walked back into the ballroom, my hands trembling but my mind strangely clear. I found Taylor and Zoe, leaned in, and whispered, I need you two to record the entire toast. Make sure you get a clear shot of the champagne glass my dad hands to me. Taylor nodded without a single question. Zoe leaned closer, whispering, What's going on? Family business. I gave a strained smile. But this time, it's gonna be different. When the moment came, my father personally poured champagne from the gold label bottle, setting my glass slightly apart from the others. He handed one to my mother, then to Sophia, before stepping right in front of me, smiling, eyes locked on mine like he was trying to pierce through every layer of my guard. I looked down at the glass, at the bottom, the faint swirl of undissolved white powder. The world seemed to slow. I turned to Sophia with a smile. Sophia, I can't keep this fine champagne all to myself. You have to try it. Before anyone could react, I swapped glasses with her, taking hers, the one she had already sipped from. My father froze for a split second. My mother's grip on her glass tightened, her eyes widening. But Sophia lifted the glass to her lips and downed the rest. I raised my now safe glass, clinking it lightly. To family. The look in my father's eyes at that moment, I'll never forget it. A mix of shock, fury, and fear. Applause broke out. The party carried on, but I knew the night would not end quietly. I just didn't expect what was coming next, because barely 30 minutes later, a sharp, piercing scream erupted from the far corner of the room. About half an hour later, as I was speaking with one of my professors, the sound of shattering glass cut through the music and laughter. Heads turned instantly. I spun around and saw Sophia, the perfect daughter, clutching her head, her face contorted in pain. She staggered a few steps, her trembling hand gripping the edge of a table before she collapsed to the floor. Her skin had gone an ashen gray, beads of cold sweat trickling down her temples. Her lips trembled, her breathing quick and shallow, like she'd just run a mile in freezing wind. The room descended into chaos. Chairs scraped, footsteps pounded, and a woman's panicked voice screamed, Call an ambulance, now! Several guests knelt beside Sophia, trying to rouse her, but her eyes were already glassy, staring into nothing. My father was the first to rush over, his face stripped of its usual composed mask, replaced by raw panic. My mother dropped to her knees, her voice breaking. Sophia, baby, answer me. But I knew. Their fear wasn't just about losing a daughter. It was the dawning realization that their perfect plan had just turned the blade back on themselves. The truth comes out. When family becomes suspects, I stood in the hospital corridor, my breathing still uneven after rushing Sophia into the ER. The harsh, cold glow of the neon lights made the air feel even heavier. I found the attending physician and spoke quickly, my tone almost an order. I suspect this is poisoning. The substance they used might be a modified form of cyclopentolate, a proprietary compound from Harris Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Patel, the doctor in charge of Sophia, froze for a moment, then asked, Are you sure? What makes you think that? I swallowed hard. I have a degree in biochemistry. I overheard my father discussing with my mother about using a compound undetectable by standard toxicology tests, and that drug could only have come from my family's lab. She gave a short nod, signaling the nurse to draw extra blood samples and run extended toxicology screens. Less than an hour later, the preliminary results came back. Every word from Dr. Patel felt like a sharp, cold blade cutting through the air. The results match a modified variant of cyclopentolate. It's a research compound not yet commercialized, highly toxic if misused. In that moment, every suspicion I had hardened into fact. There was no room left for doubt. My parents had truly gone through with it, and their target had been me. The hospital security was alerted immediately. Within 10 minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived, followed by a woman in a black suit who introduced herself as Detective Rivera. Her voice was low, calm, but cutting. "Miss Danielle, I need you to walk me through everything from the very beginning. No detail left out." I recounted everything, from overhearing my parents' conversation to spotting the powder at the bottom of my champagne glass to my split-second decision to switch drinks with Sophia. Rivera took notes, occasionally looking up to lock eyes with me, as if measuring the weight behind each word. When I handed over the video Taylor had recorded, Rivera immediately signaled an officer to make a copy. Minutes later, 2 FBI agents arrived. One of them, Special Agent Donovan, didn't waste time. "We've been investigating Harris Pharmaceuticals for fraud and environmental violations. This poisoning case may tie directly into our investigation." They split into teams. One stayed to collect my statement and witness accounts. The other moved into the family waiting room. I heard hurried footsteps, then my mother's voice rising sharply. "This is absurd! Who would accuse us of poisoning our own daughter?" My father's voice was lower but laced with tension. "We want a lawyer, now." Detective Rivera returned to me, speaking quietly. "We'll be separating your parents for individual questioning. If they're innocent, they'll cooperate. If not, the cracks will show." I simply nodded. My heart was no longer pounding from fear, but from something else. Resolve. Years of being dismissed, controlled, and silenced. And now the evidence was finally lining up on the table. When my father was moved from the temporary interview room to another, he stopped in front of me for a brief moment. His eyes burned with rage, his lips curling into a cold, almost amused smile. "You just destroyed your own family, Danielle." I met his gaze evenly. "No, Father, you did that yourself." My mother was different. When they led her away, she avoided meeting my eyes. But as she passed, she whispered so faintly it was almost lost under the hospital hum. "You don't understand. Everything we did was to protect the Harris name." The FBI wasted no time sealing off both my family's penthouse in downtown Chicago and the headquarters of Harris Pharmaceuticals. One of the agents handed me a copy of the search warrant, his voice low but pointed. "If we find this compound in their storage or labs, it's direct, indisputable evidence." I sat in the hospital's waiting area, staring through the glass into Sophia's room. She was still unconscious, machines beeping in steady intervals. My chest was a knot of conflicting emotions: rage at my parents, pity for my sister, and guilt that she, not me, was the one lying in that bed. Dr. Lewis approached, resting a steady hand on my shoulder. "We'll do everything we can to pull her through." "But Danielle, you need to be ready. This is only the beginning." And I knew he was right. A family that had lived on lies and power for decades wouldn't just lose a reputation when the truth came out. Everything they'd built would burn. What I didn't know was that what the FBI would uncover in my father's vault was far more horrifying than I imagined. Sophia wakes, and the Harris Empire's buried secrets. When Sophia's eyes finally opened, the harsh white hospital lights reflected in pupils still clouded with fatigue. I sat by her bedside, gently holding her hand. Her skin felt cold and my heart clenched. Her voice was raspy, but every word was clear enough to hit me like a stone. "Danielle, they told me you were almost poisoned. Is that true? I swallowed, nodding slowly. It's true, and you drank that champagne instead of me. She closed her eyes, tears escaping down her cheeks. After a long pause, she whispered, You need to know. A few weeks ago, I saw files on the company's server about dumping heavy metals into the water supply. I didn't understand, so I stayed quiet. Now I realize it's worse than I thought. Her words fell into place like the final piece of a puzzle. This wasn't just about money. There was a deadly environmental secret that could obliterate Harris Pharmaceuticals if exposed. That afternoon, the FBI called both Sophia and me into a small meeting room at the hospital. Special Agent Donovan opened a thick file, his tone steady but razor sharp. We've been investigating Harris Pharmaceuticals for the past 6 months. Potential charges include financial fraud, falsifying clinical trial data, and severe violations of environmental law. He spread photographs across the table, altered trial reports, fake safety certificates, and, most damning, lab results showing lead and mercury levels in nearby water, dozens of times above legal limits. We also found in Joseph Harris's safe a separate file, a detailed plan to frame you, Danielle, if the poisoning attempt failed. I frowned. Frame me? How? Fabricated photos, fake emails, even a signed lease for a chemical storage unit under your name, all prepared months in advance as a contingency. Sophia covered her mouth, visibly shaken. The agents went on. During the search, they discovered an encrypted hard drive with audio recordings of closed-door meetings where my parents discussed managing clinical trial data. There were clips of my father ordering subordinates to ignore dangerous side effects to push products through approval deadlines. Every sentence was another blow, a hurricane of betrayal tearing through everything I'd once called family. And perhaps worst of all, Donovan continued, we've traced millions in offshore transfers directly linked to government research and testing contracts Harris Pharmaceuticals signed. Sophia sat up a little straighter despite her weakness, her voice trembling but resolute. If you need my testimony, you'll have it. I signed some documents my father told me were internal formalities. I need to review them now. I gripped her hand tightly. Our eyes met, for the first time without the walls of golden child and forgotten daughter between us. The next morning, the FBI invited me to headquarters to review the evidence firsthand. Inside a records room, file boxes were stacked floor to ceiling, each numbered and labeled. I immediately recognized my father's handwriting on some of the documents. Among them was a printed email he had sent to his attorney, discussing the right time to act, dated exactly 1 week before my graduation. An agent pointed to a photograph taken inside the company's storage facility. Massive industrial chemical drums, marked with hazard symbols, stacked dangerously close together with zero safety precautions. This is the source of multiple dumping incidents. We've collected samples and they're being analyzed as we speak. On the drive back to the hospital, I sat in Special Agent Rivera's car. She glanced at me and spoke quietly. Danielle, I know this isn't easy, but your cooperation, and your sister's, will be the key. Once this goes to court, what your family has done won't be able to hide behind a polished facade anymore. I was silent for a few moments before answering. I spent my whole childhood trying to make them proud. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing what's right, even if that means standing against them. When I returned to the hospital, Sophia was stronger, able to sit up without help. We talked for a long time about what the FBI had found and how we would face it together. She admitted that all these years, she had never once questioned our parents, trusting completely in the perfect family image they built. You were right, she sighed. We were just pawns in their game. I looked at her, feeling both an ache and a strange sense of relief, because at least now I wasn't fighting alone. But just when we thought the situation had reached its worst, an agent walked in carrying a thick envelope. We've just recovered documents from the law offices representing Harris Pharmaceuticals. This could change the entire case. I met Sophia's eyes and we both understood. The real storm was only just beginning, the day in court when the truth has nowhere left to hide. The courtroom was packed that day. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a stark glow over rows filled with reporters, attorneys, and curious onlookers eager to witness the case that had shaken Chicago for weeks. I sat in the witness section, my hands clasped tightly together, forcing myself to breathe steadily. Beside me, Sophia still looked tired, but there was an unmistakable steadiness in her eyes. Across the room, my parents sat side by side at the defense table. My father wore a dark suit, his tie knotted perfectly, as if he were attending a board meeting rather than facing an attempted murder charge. My mother wore a pristine white suit, her face carefully composed, though her hands trembled faintly in her lap. The prosecutor began by playing the video from my graduation party the moment my father handed me the special champagne glass and I switched it with Sophia's. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the projector. As Sophia drank from the glass, I noticed some people hold their breath, while others turned to stare at my parents in disbelief. Next came the toxicology report. The expert's voice was steady and precise. The compound found in the victim's blood is a variant of cyclopentolate exclusive to the research labs of Harris Pharmaceuticals and never released to the market. The prosecutor then laid out the motive. A $12 million trust fund my parents would inherit if I died before receiving it, and the looming risk that I might expose the company's environmental violations and clinical trial fraud, secrets that could destroy Harris Pharmaceuticals if they came to light. But the most damning moment came when the prosecutor played a jailhouse recording of my father's voice, dry and cutting. Danielle has always been the troublemaker. She's never understood what loyalty to family means. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. I met my father's gaze, but he stared straight ahead, unmoved. Outside, the media frenzy was already in full swing. Headlines blared. Pharma CEO and wife arrested for plotting to murder daughter. FBI uncovers fraud and environmental crimes. On social media, thousands of posts erupted, shock, outrage, and confirmation from former employees about the toxic work environment and orders to adjust test results. During the recess, Sophia quietly asked, "Do you think they'll plead guilty?" I shook my head. No, they'll cling to the misunderstood victim act until the end. For them, reputation matters more than the truth. Oh, a reporter approached me. "Danielle, do you have anything you'd like to say to your parents?" I looked straight into the camera. The truth will always find its way into the light, and I am no longer the frightened child in the Harris household. That afternoon, the prosecutor called me to the stand. I recounted everything, from overhearing their conversation to spotting the white powder in the champagne to discovering the plan to frame me. At one point, my voice tightened, but I didn't let myself cry. This was my chance not just to testify against them, but to finally speak the truth I had carried for years. The defense attorney tried to imply that I had deliberately let Sophia take the poisoned drink. I answered firmly. I acted in the moment, believing the dose was only enough to make someone ill, not kill. But regardless, my father put that substance in the glass with the intent to harm me. That fact doesn't change. As I stepped down from the stand, my father tilted his head toward me, his eyes a mix of anger and defiance. I returned his look with nothing but ice. By the end of the day, the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to bring the case to full trial on all charges: attempted murder, conspiracy to poison, financial fraud, falsifying clinical trial data, and severe violations of environmental law. That night, I returned to Taylor and Zoe's apartment, the place I had been staying temporarily. We sat in the living room, the evening news playing on the TV, showing footage of my parents being led out of the courthouse. Taylor handed me a mug of hot tea. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded slightly, my eyes still fixed on the images on the screen. I'm okay, because at least the truth isn't buried anymore. But deep down, I knew the road ahead would be long. The official trial would be a battle, and my parents were not the kind of people to surrender easily. When I switched off the TV, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Danielle, be careful. They still have cards left to play." I read the message over and over, a chill creeping down my spine. Could there still be a part of this story I didn't know? And in that moment, I understood this fight was far from over. Stepping out of the shadow, the sisters' journey to freedom. After the preliminary hearing, both Sophia and I knew we could no longer allow ourselves to be chained to the Harris name. Together, we sat down in the office of attorney Vivian Santos, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a firm, steady voice. "If you truly want to sever all ties with the company," she said, "we'll need to file the paperwork to relinquish all rights, including your inheritance of company shares." I looked at Sophia without a moment's hesitation. "We agree. Money from that company is stained with blood and toxic chemicals." Sophia nodded, and for the first time, I saw her speak calmly about walking away from Harris Pharmaceuticals. "You're right. Keeping it would only mean continuing to carry their guilt on our shoulders." When the legal process was completed, I officially received the funds from the trust my grandmother Lillian had left behind. Seeing the $12 million appear in my bank account was both staggering and relieving. But I knew this wasn't just money. It was the key to freedom and a tool to begin repairing some of the damage my parents had caused. I immediately worked with Vivian to establish the Community Support Fund for Industrial Pollution Victims. Its mission was to provide free water testing services, medical assistance for residents living near waste dumping sites, and to sponsor environmental restoration projects. At the press conference launching the fund, I stood before a row of reporters, not shying away from the past. I was once part of the family that owned Harris Pharmaceuticals, a company responsible for the harm many communities still endure. I can't change what they did, but I can choose not to be silent and not to enable them. This is my promise. Sophia also made an important decision. As soon as she recovered, she submitted her resignation from the company. Instead of continuing in an executive role, she proactively contacted the FBI, providing every piece of insider information she knew. "You know," she told me one evening as we sat together on the apartment balcony, "for years I thought loyalty to the family meant hiding everything. Now I understand loyalty to what's right is what truly matters." I stayed silent, just placing my hand over hers. To me, those words marked a huge step, not only in breaking free from our parents' shadow, but also in mending the rift between us. Sophia began studying environmental law. She spent hours reading up on industrial pollution lawsuits, attending seminars, and speaking with specialized attorneys. One afternoon, when I came home from the foundation office, she greeted me with a bright smile. "I've decided," she said, "I'm going to enroll in law school, environmental law." I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "I'm proud of you. We'll fix what they destroyed, together." But the new path wasn't all sunshine. Publicly opposing our parents made us targets of criticism and even threats. Anonymous letters arrived at the foundation's office, along with social media comments accusing us of betraying our family or grandstanding for attention. One evening, while I was reviewing the foundation's financial reports, Vivian called with a serious tone. "Danielle, I just got word that some former company employees are trying to spread defamatory rumors about you and Sophia. We need to prepare a response." I pressed my lips together. "Let them talk. As long as the truth comes to light, I don't care." Even so, We received support from unexpected places. A group of residents living near the West Plant, the one that had once dumped toxic waste, sent letters of thanks and offered to help the foundation. They shared heartbreaking stories about their health, about children born with birth defects, and said that as long as someone was willing to stand up, they would stand with us. Those letters reminded me that every step forward was worth it, even if the road ahead remained steep and rough. A year after leaving Harris Pharmaceuticals, Sophia and I stood side by side at the groundbreaking ceremony for a project to clean a section of river once heavily polluted. Sophia addressed dozens of local residents and volunteers. Today, we're not just beginning to clean this river, we're starting a new chapter, one of transparency, of justice, and of hope. I looked at her, my heart swelling with pride and gratitude. From being pawns in our parents' power games, we had become true allies, rewriting our family story with truth and action. But just when I thought things were finally moving in the right direction, a brown envelope arrived at the foundation office. Inside was a candid photo of Sophia and me, with a single scrawled line: "It's not over. The past will find its way back." I gripped the photo, a familiar chill crawling down my spine. Maybe the shadow of Harris still wasn't done with us. Grandmother's legacy, the final secret and mission. I still remember that afternoon, sorting through a few old boxes of my grandmother Lillian's documents that had been sent from storage, when I stumbled upon a worn brown leather notebook. The edges were frayed, the spine bore faint scratches, and the pages carried that familiar blend of old paper and lavender, the scent my grandmother always wore. On the very first page, in her graceful yet unwavering handwriting, was a single sentence: "Only Danielle has the strength to break the toxin embedded in this family's blood." I sat frozen for a long moment, each word carving itself into my mind. She knew. She had seen it all long before, and even believed that I would be the only one willing to confront it. The journal contained not just her personal reflections, but detailed accounts of family meetings, the times she had tried to persuade my father to change how he ran the company, and warnings about how my parents were willing to sacrifice anything, even their own family, to protect their power. One passage made my skin crawl. Eleanor says reputation is more important than anything, even life itself. Joseph believes no one remembers the weak. They raise their children like birds in a golden cage. Beautiful, but when they're no longer useful, they're left to starve. A few pages later, she wrote about the trust fund, not simply as financial security for me, but as a weapon I could use against my own family if that day ever came. Around the same time, the FBI contacted us with a new discovery. Agent Lane, who was leading the investigation, met with Sophia and me at the Foundation's office. He placed a thick file on the table, bound tightly with rubber bands. "We've finished searching the last two hidden data vaults of Harris Pharmaceuticals," he said. "The results are worse than we imagined." I opened the file, and right on the first pages was a chart listing patient deaths following the use of a new fever-reducing drug. The trial data had been altered to hide the severe side effect rates. Sophia swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "How many?" Lane replied slowly. "At least 57 deaths over 3 years, and more than 200 severe complications. All of them were merged into unrelated categories in the official reports." The FBI had also uncovered a hush payment system, large sums transferred to victims' families, each accompanied by an airtight non-disclosure agreement. In many cases, the victims were children living near the plant, suffering illnesses caused by prolonged exposure to heavy metal-contaminated water. I picked up one photo from the file, a little girl of about 8, nearly bald, with a faint, fragile smile. The note beneath said she had passed away just 6 months after her symptoms appeared. It felt like a boulder pressing against my chest. All those years of living in luxury, enjoying extravagant parties, were built on the blood and tears of innocent people. Sophia sat in silence, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. Finally, she spoke. Danielle, we can't just hand these over to the court. The public needs to see everything. Lane nodded. We're preparing a public report alongside the criminal charges, but we'll need your permission to include certain personal materials, including your grandmother Lillian's journal. I looked at the notebook on the table, then at Sophia. No words were needed. We both understood. My grandmother hadn't left it to me to keep hidden, but to one day turn it into evidence. That night, I took the journal home, sitting alone by the window, the streetlight casting a warm glow over the yellowed pages. I read from the beginning again. Each line felt like a quiet reminder, never turn away from the truth, no matter how merciless it is. I remembered when I was little, standing by the river with my grandmother as she told me stories about fish species driven to extinction by pollution. She said, if you see something wrong, don't stay silent. Silence is also complicity. Only now did I fully understand the weight of those words. 3 days later, Sophia and I signed the release granting permission for the FBI to publish all the documents, including Lillian's journal, in their public report. We knew it would make the trial louder, the media digging into every dark corner of our family, but we also knew it was the only way to end decades of lies. After signing, Sophia gripped my hand tightly. If Grandma were still alive, she'd be proud of you. I smiled, though inside I felt a bittersweet mix of pride and grief. When the FBI released the report, major news outlets ran the story for 24 hours straight. Headlines flooded social media. Harris Pharmaceuticals hid deaths and illnesses. Grandmother Lillian's journal exposes the truth. Photos, charts, victim testimonies, all over the news. There was no way for my parents to deny it now. But while I was giving a live interview, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "The toxin isn't only in their blood, it's in those they've bought. Be careful." I froze. Had Sophia and I just opened the door to a battle far bigger than we ever imagined? Judgment Day, when the chains of family shattered. It took nearly a year from the moment the curtain of secrecy was pulled back for all the legal procedures, investigations, and negotiations to finally reach their conclusion. I still remember that crisp autumn morning when attorney Vivian called with the news. Danielle, the court has accepted the plea deal. Your father will serve 20 years in prison, your mother 15. Eleanor agreed to testify against her husband in exchange for the lighter sentence. I stayed silent for several seconds. I had known this day would come, yet hearing those numbers made my chest feel heavy. Not out of pity, but from the realization that the long chain of our family's tragedies had finally reached its end. On the day of sentencing, Sophia and I sat in the courtroom. My father, Joseph Harris, walked in wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, his head held high, his cold gaze as if the whole world owed him something. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he responded curtly, "I have no regrets. Everything I did was to protect this company, protect the Harris family legacy." His words lodged in my throat. Even in the final moment, he could reduce the lives of his daughters and dozens of innocent people to nothing more than figures on a profit sheet. My mother was different. Eleanor took the stand with sunken eyes and hair now streaked heavily with gray. Her voice was hoarse and trembling, though still tinged with that familiar calculation. I chose to testify because I no longer wanted to defend what was wrong, but it's far too late now. I knew she didn't say it out of remorse, but because she had finally realized there was no longer a seat of power left for her to cling to. When the sentences were read, the room fell into complete silence. I felt as if an invisible chain around my neck had finally been unlocked. Sophia squeezed my hand and whispered, "We're free now, Danielle." For the first time in years, I believed her. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work as if trying to make up for all the lost time. The Community Support Fund for Industrial Pollution Victims began rolling out a wave of new projects, installing water filtration systems in schools within affected areas, providing free medical screenings, and partnering with international organizations to restore contaminated land. Each time I saw children laughing beside clean water fountains, I thought of my grandmother Lillian. I believed she would smile knowing we had turned pain into action. Sophia began her own journey. She moved closer to her law school, splitting her time between studies and participating in environmental policy research projects. I often received late-night texts from her. Just finished reading a case on illegal dumping in Michigan. So many parallels to ours. I think I want to become a lawyer for affected communities, not just in the U.S. Every time I read her messages, my chest warmed. Sophia was no longer the golden child kept safe in a glass cage. She had found her own path. Yet even after breaking free from our parents' shadow, the echoes of what had happened still clung to us. Some nights I would dream of my father's eyes, cold and proud, staring at me in the courtroom. I knew that somewhere in prison, he still believed he was right. One day, while reviewing foundation records, Vivian texted me, "I just received a request from Joseph's attorney. He wants to see you." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to hear what he had to say, but another part feared he would only use the meeting to plant more poison in my mind. By year's end, my foundation received an award from an international nonprofit for our contributions to pollution remediation and community aid. On stage, holding the award, I said, "There are burdens we're born into, but that doesn't mean we must let them define our entire lives. What matters is choosing to face them and to change." In the audience, Sophia smiled and nodded. The lake house, where truth dissolves every poison. My grandmother, Lillian's lake house, sat apart from the town, surrounded by crimson maple trees in autumn and willow branches dipping into the water in spring. It had once been my refuge whenever life in the city with my family became so stifling I could hardly breathe. After everything that happened, Sophia and I decided to keep it, not only as an inheritance, but as a spiritual base camp for our new beginning. The first day back, the wooden door gave a faint creak as I pushed it open. The scent of aged wood, the faint aroma of chamomile tea my grandmother always brewed, and the musty sweetness of old paper from the large bookshelf in the living room all washed over me, blurring my vision with emotion. Sophia stood by the doorway for a long moment before murmuring, "It feels like she's still here, Danny." I smiled and nodded. In my memory, my grandmother was the only person who ever looked at me for who I truly was, without the lens of judgment or the weight of family expectations. We spent days cleaning and restoring every little corner. The wooden desk by the window, where she used to write in her journals, was polished smooth again. The rocking chairs on the porch got a fresh coat of paint. Sophia insisted on keeping the half-finished blue knitted blanket draped over the sofa as a reminder that some stories, though unfinished, are still worth holding on to. At night, we sat together on the porch, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the lake. The chirping of crickets in the grass and the whisper of wind through the willows made the world feel so still. I almost forgot the noise and danger still waiting beyond this place. One evening, sipping hot tea, Sophia asked, "Do you think, if Grandma hadn't been here, what would have happened to us?" I looked down at the lake, the moonlight swaying with each gentle wave. I probably would have become part of what she called the poison, and I'd never have known a different kind of life. We fell silent for a while. Then I spoke again, almost to myself. "You know, blood ties are just a biological thread. They don't give anyone the right to destroy you. Real family is made of the people who protect you, respect you, and love you, even if you share no DNA." Sophia smiled softly. "So who's your family now, then?" I met her gaze without hesitation. "You, Grandma. The friends who stood by me when everything fell apart. everyone who chose to stay, not just the ones whose names are on a birth certificate. During our days at the lake house, I began writing my story, from childhood memories to the night a glass of wine changed everything. Not to seek pity, but to preserve the truth, the only antidote that could end every lie. I sent the first draft to a friend in publishing. After reading it, she called me and said, "Danielle, this story isn't just yours. It's going to speak to anyone who's been underestimated by family or society, anyone who's been hurt by those they trusted most." Hearing that, I knew I was on the right path. Sophia kept up with her law studies, but every weekend she drove back. We turned the lake house into a small gathering place for community meetings, sharing knowledge about environmental law and public health. Families from polluted areas came, bringing questions, fears, and hope. One afternoon, after a talk with a group of parents, a middle-aged woman took my hand, her eyes glistening. "Thank you. I thought I was alone, but now I know I'm not." Her words reminded me of something Grandma used to say. Truth might take its time to appear, but once it does, it spreads like light, unstoppable. Before bed that night, I stood on the porch, gazing at the distant lights of the town. I thought about everything: the betrayals, the trials, the pages of journals, and the final moment I said goodbye to my parents in court. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "The strongest antidote to every poison is the truth, and I will never let it be buried again." I end this story not to reopen old wounds, but to remind anyone listening that once truth is set free, it becomes the power that can release you from every chain. Family isn't just about blood. Sometimes it's the people you choose and trust. If my story has touched you, please like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you won't miss the next true, powerful, and inspiring story.